Hello class, now we come to this third week and we're going to address the topic of cultural apologetics. As you all know, you're supposed to read the book by Len Munsell, the president of ACU, and the motto of ACU is transforming culture with truth. So the underlying idea is that the truth is transformative both to the individual as well as the collective. So as a believer, we're renewed by knowing the truth, we're sanctified by the truth, and we're set free by it. And what is true of the individual will be true of the collective, and that is, if we know the truth and put it into practice in our own lives, then that truth can now be spread to others, either by action, by word, or by reflection, and it can permeate the culture gradually and in an organic fashion. So this idea of transforming culture will require that we know the truth and that we're faithful witnesses to it, that we don't take the name of the Lord our God in vain. So this is what this section is going to be about. I will try to expose you to the areas of culture which are most prominently on a dispute between worldviews. I will introduce you to the idea of a worldview and then provide you some of the titles that can help you in navigating this discourse and these ideas about cultural apologetics. So what you have here, the first challenge is knowing the truth for oneself and then making that truth known to others. That's one of the difficulties. It is important to know the areas in which the truth is to permeate the culture and what constitutes a culture as such. What elements are part of that. So in the 1970s, the founder of Campus Crusades developed this formulation of 7 aspects, and it is a helpful way of grasping what constitutes a culture. So the culture is going to be a way of life that is shared in common. So each individual person or family has their own culture or subculture within a larger culture, and so the set of beliefs that we use to live our lives constitute our own culture. But yet, when we live in the conglomerate and as a nation and as an American culture, then we have a set of values that we share in common, and those values are disseminated through several institutions so that complement each other. So what you have here, there were 7 identified components which are called the 7 mountains of culture, and as Christians we're supposed to climb them and claim them for Christ. And as we go through them, you will get a sense of where the church is and the influence of the Christian culture in transforming our surrounding environment. So this puts the responsibility both at the individual as well as the collective level. Where am I as a person, and what is my influence on the culture around me and those whom God has entrusted to my care? And the other one is, how is the church doing as a whole in identifying the problem, in being a faithful witness through these institutions? So let me go ahead and start from religion. So religion is going to constitute a belief or set of beliefs that people use to make sense of their lives. So what you have in this area of religion, religion has been committed to the private sphere. So in the past, Christianity was the basis upon which the Puritans and all throughout the 1800s and so on, in which this culture was founded and operated within a mixture, of course, of some deism and other perspectives. But religion was a public matter. It was something that you share in common with others, that you celebrated. Now religion has become privatized, in which case much of the influence of religion in other institutions has been cut down by that limitation, the wall of separation between church and state, and the influences that may have. So the marginalizing of religion to the private sphere is not in and of itself a detriment to religion per se, because as individuals we carry our religion with us. It influences the way we educate. It influences what we watch in media, entertainment, and the arts. And so even though I don't have to profess that I'm a Christian, I can live by one. I can spend my money and my time and my intellectual resources and so on in a way that is glorifying to God, and that religion can have a way out. The problem is that religion not only has become privatized, but it has also been defragmented. It's not seen as a unified whole. So compartmentalized would be another term that you can use, and that is people are taught ordinarily how to live in different spheres of culture, but yet the big larger picture of how these things interrelate is not something that we're quickly able to see and do. So how do my finances reflect my Christian worldview? That's not something that people can easily articulate. Or how about my conception of family and roles in the family and family discipline and education? How do those things reflect my Christian perspective and worldview? And media, what do I watch and when do I watch it? Those things become more difficult depending on where we are in our level of maturity and exposure. And we have an advantage in the fact that in the last 20 or 30 years, there had been a resurgence of this idea of a Christian worldview, and where Christianity is taken out of just simply a few moral guidance and activities that you do, like attend church and pray, meditate and fast and so on. Those are usually seen as small practices that were kind of separated, but we have now moved more towards a more integrative conception of what that means. And there's quite an extensive list of books that have been published trying to teach us how to incorporate those things. So religion has been an area in which secularism has by far triumphed. The influence of the Christian church today in the culture is very minimal. The church is hardly ever consulted as to what public policy should take place. The church has been, and the influence of religion has been set aside for academic circles, and the higher the universities of most prestige that began as Christian universities, like Harvard and Princeton and Yale, are no longer identified with Christianity. So religion in that sense has, we have lost that battle. The public, now we engage in what's called the naked public square, where supposedly one brings no religious conception into public discussions. And we are now playing and engaging in culture and cultural war in terms that are kind of antithetical or contrary to the idea of a worldview as comprehensive. So religion now is pretty much subdued and much diminished. There are only a few value issues, and notice even the question of values is something that is not rooted in natural law or absolute right and wrong. Your values is something that just simply reflects what your set of beliefs are, but it doesn't tell me whether they are true or not. So even the language that we use to engage in cultural discussions about what's right and wrong, we speak about conservative values and family values and Christian values and Judeo-Christian values, but values are just relative to your own perspective. They are not, they are subjective in nature. And so even the language that we use today is geared towards segregating truth from religion and religion from culture, especially from public life. Now, after religion, of course, you have the idea of media, media and arts and entertainment. They are both going to be seen side by side. They channel the perspectives and create the narratives that they see as important. They report on what they see as something worthwhile. They define what good and evil is in the public eyes. They demonize some sins and not others. They portray to you what values have been handed down. May it be feminism, may it be excessive masculinity, may it be hatred and despise for Wall Street and gambling and making money. All of those things are portrayed through those areas, and it is not a secret. The media and Hollywood and entertainment have by large push for moral precepts, nudity, sexuality, violence, language are all things that permeate our movies. You seldomly find a movie that both has a substantive message as well as not unnecessary scenes in it. In many cases, as Christians, you have to kind of cover your eyes and avoid certain scenes because of how impactful they are. But all of those things are incorporated. They are primarily now in the secular sphere, and they have kind of won that over. In business, remember we live by the motto today of buyer beware. A moral culture would not function under that motto, and that is what we function under, which is if you get cheated, it's because you were stupid. You should have asked. You should have not trust. You should have verified. And so now the responsibility is not put on the seller primarily to disclose all the relevant knowledge that he has or she has of the sale or the object, but it is now put on the buyer who carries the burden on having to overcome that deceitfulness and lies. And then of course business has from the lower to the highest, from what happened in 2008 and the financial debacles and the collusion between government and the economic sector and the interconnectedness of lobbyists and government officials. All of that has proliferated. It is quite well known. Corruption is widespread, and business are done and investment is done for the immediate returns, not for long-term investments. It is an area that requires sacrifice, that requires the use of, in many cases, the high-end investors, that requires use of drugs and other ways of keeping your mind sharp and engaged and at high levels of energy. So that is an area that has pretty much been overtaken. And then you have the educational system, which of course it is primarily monopolized. It is run by state and local governments, and it is financed and subsidized by taxpayers, and in the name of neutrality kind of has set aside a religious perspective, and it seeks to inculcate in the student this idea of subjectivity and values and the importance of one's emotions. And C.S. Lewis is going to address that more later as to how the secular perception kind of permeates our culture without us realizing what it is until much later. Then you have the family, which is of course in shambles, as we have experienced. 50+% of divorce, an incredible number of single mothers and fathers. The statistics are just absolutely devastating. The nucleus of the traditional family, or what remains of it, is very minimal. Fathers are little involved in the education and caring for their children. It is quite a grim picture to see, and how it has unfolded. And if you're interested in that, I can recommend some books as to what to read on it, but it is quite a depressing picture that we have. And of course, government and the military. Now, the military tends to be the kind of like the one sector that evades some of the criticisms. People in the military usually have a high sense of honor and tend to fulfill the mission that has been given to them to the best of their ability. But yet, the military is under the guidance of whomever is in political power, and then what the motives are and how they operate. So even though you may have brave soldiers who are doing and acting according to the best of their ability, what the mission is, they don't get to determine that. What the objectives and the geopolitical ramifications of it, that is something that could or could not be influenced by proper righteous judgment. And then of course government and the growth of what's called the welfare state, and the way in which the state has set aside the role of the parent in the education of the children, the way it has infiltrated education, the way it has made people dependent upon itself, and then it has used ideologies, secular ideologies to permeate culture. All of that is widespread and quite noticeable in our time. So this is just a recap of some of the aspects of culture and where the church is. There's much more that can be said, and we can discuss that on our Zoom meeting but I will stop there and proceed to give you some books that can inform your